The lobby of the Langford Tower was all glass and marble, a place so polished that even the air seemed expensive. Every morning, the revolving doors spun like a slow, graceful carousel, ushering in men and women in tailored suits, shining shoes, and faces that rarely looked down. Except one man always did. David Morales pushed his mop across the mirror-like floor, his khaki uniform blending into the beige walls. The cleaning cart squeaked softly beside him, a lonely sound swallowed by the constant rhythm of high heels, phone calls, and elevator chimes. He had learned over the years how to make himself small, invisible. That was part of the job. Move efficiently, smile politely, and disappear before anyone remembers your name. But there was one thing about Langford Tower that never let him fully disappear: the grand piano. It stood in the center of the lobby, a black Steinway, massive and majestic, silent most days, its lid closed like a sleeping beast. To most, it was just decor, another symbol of luxury for clients to admire. To David, it was something else entirely, a heartbeat that refused to die. Every evening after the last suit had gone home and the nightlights glowed pale blue across the floor, David would pause by the piano before leaving. He'd pull out a soft cloth from his cart and gently wipe the keys, even though no one ever touched them. His fingers would linger for a second too long, brushing ivory and ebony like greeting an old friend. He never played, not here, not where cameras watched and people might notice. But in that silent lobby, he felt something stir beneath the weight of years, like the faint echo of music trying to find its way home. David was in his mid-40s, with tired eyes and hands that looked too delicate for a janitor. Calloused, yes, but with a strange precision to every movement, as though each swipe of the mop was measured like a musician's tempo. He'd been working at Langford Tower for almost 3 years. He arrived early, left late, and never complained. He was the man who refilled the sanitizer, unclogged the sinks, replaced the lobby flowers when no one else noticed they were wilting. Sometimes he hummed while he worked, quiet, haunting melodies that no one recognized. A few employees heard him once and joked that he should audition for a talent show. David just smiled and kept mopping. He didn't want applause. He only wanted to feel alive for a few seconds at a time. His small rented room across town held nothing but a mattress, a cracked mirror, and one framed photo: his mother standing beside a worn upright piano, her hand on his shoulder. The picture was faded, but the memory was not. She used to say, "Music is what the soul sounds like when it remembers who it is." He hadn't heard that sound in years. That morning, a buzz ran through the building, whispers, emails, the hum of anticipation. The new CEO was coming, Victoria Lang. She was young, brilliant, and terrifying. A headline maker who'd transformed 2 companies before she turned 35. The kind of woman whose presence made people adjust their posture. David had seen executives come and go, but there was something different in the way everyone prepared for her arrival. The fear, the excitement, the exhaustion of wanting to impress someone who probably wouldn't even remember their names. He was polishing the elevator doors when he saw her reflection approach, tall, composed, all sharp edges and cold perfume. Her heels clicked like clockwork. She didn't walk, she commanded. A small team trailed behind her, tablets in hand, murmuring updates. "Lobby could use more light," she said, without looking up. "Yes, ma'am," an assistant replied instantly. When she passed the piano, she paused for half a second, enough for David to notice. She studied it, her expression unreadable. Then she moved on. That was the first time she saw him, though really she didn't. Her eyes slid over him like glass over shadow. Later that night, after everyone left, David stayed behind to finish waxing the floor, the smell of lemon polish mixed with the faint scent of flowers from the lobby arrangements. He looked at the piano again. The faint reflection of city lights shimmered across its surface. He checked the cameras, one above the entrance, one near the elevators. Both faced away from the bench. He hesitated, then slowly he sat. The leather creaked softly under his weight. His hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. He pressed one note, a flat. The sound was pure, fragile, echoing through the empty lobby like a whisper in a cathedral. His throat tightened. He pressed another, then another. The melody came back like an old language rediscovered. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Hesitant at first, then fuller, warmer. The notes rolled like soft waves, washing the dust off his heart. In that moment, he wasn't a janitor. He wasn't invisible. He was a man who had once belonged to the music. He closed his eyes and let the sound fill the room, delicate, precise, alive. And then he heard it, the echo of heels. He froze. "Excuse me." Her voice was sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. David turned. Victoria Lang stood near the entrance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The cold lights above caught the diamond pins in her hair. He shot up from the bench, flustered. I'm sorry, Mum. I didn't mean—" She raised a hand to stop him. "Relax. I'm not going to fire you for touching a piano. I was just surprised." Her tone softened slightly, more curiosity than anger now. She took a few steps closer, heels echoing on marble. "You know what you were playing?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes," he said quietly, "Chopin." Her brow lifted. "Really?" He nodded. "Nocturne in E-flat major." For the first time, her lips twitched into something almost like a smile. "Well, you certainly have good taste for a janitor." The word stung, though she didn't mean it cruelly, not yet. He offered a polite nod, unsure what else to say. Victoria leaned against the piano. "Tell me, Mr. Morales," he said. "David Morales." "Tell me, Mr. Morales," she said, "how does a janitor know Chopin?" He hesitated. "Once upon a time, I thought I might make a living from music." Her eyes flickered, a mix of disbelief and intrigue. "Really? And what happened?" He smiled faintly. "Life." Something in his tone made her pause, but before she could reply, her assistant appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. "Ms. Lang, the finance team's ready for the call." She straightened instantly, authority returning like armor. "Coming." Then she looked back at him, her voice now carrying that polished, dismissive tone again. "Well, Mr. Morales, if you can really play Chopin, maybe you're in the wrong job." She smirked lightly, almost teasing. "Play it perfectly next time I visit, and I'll hire you as our resident pianist on the spot." David blinked. Was she serious? But she was already walking away. He stood there, heart pounding, staring at the piano like it had suddenly come alive. That night, long after Victoria left, the words kept echoing in his mind. "If you can play Chopin, I'll hire you on the spot." It wasn't kindness, it wasn't even respect. It was a test, a cruel, careless remark. But to David, it was more than that. It was a door. For years he had scrubbed the same floors, lived the same silent days, convinced that the world had forgotten him. But now, someone, even if by accident, had seen a glimpse of the man he used to be. He looked at his reflection in the piano lid, tired, wrinkled, weary. Then he placed his hands back on the keys. The melody began again. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And for the first time in years, David Morales felt something he thought was gone forever. The city outside the Langford Tower never slept. Its skyline shimmered with ambition, every window a restless dream, every light a reminder that success here was measured not by heart, but by hours. For most employees, the CEO's challenge to the janitor was a passing joke, an odd footnote in the gossip cycle. "The Chopin janitor," they whispered with amusement. But for David Morales, those words weren't a joke. They were a mirror, reflecting everything he'd lost, everything he still might reclaim. That night, David couldn't close his eyes. The hum of the street below his small apartment window was drowned out by the phantom sound of the piano keys beneath his fingers. His body ached from scrubbing floors, but his mind replayed every note he'd once known. He pulled out an old, battered notebook from the top of his dresser, a relic of another life. Inside were yellowed sheets of music, hand-copied during his conservatory days in Warsaw. Each bar of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major was written with reverence, almost trembling devotion. He placed it on the table, his hand brushing over the faded ink. The room was silent, except for the sound of his breath, uneven, hesitant. There was no piano here, only the ghost of one. So he practiced in his head. He closed his eyes, tapped invisible keys on the tabletop, and let the melody replay in his memory. He could almost feel the weight of the keys, the soft resistance of ivory under his fingertips. The music was rusty, fragmented, but it was there. And as he played, he began to remember not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. The reason Chopin had written them in the first place. The ache of loss, the tenderness of memory, the unspoken words of love and longing. It wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. That night, the janitor rediscovered his own. Victoria Lang was not an unkind woman, but she was a busy one, and that often felt the same. She had inherited her father's empire at 34 and spent every waking hour ensuring she never became a disappointment. Her mornings began with meetings and ended with numbers. Success had its own music, the rhythm of deadlines, signatures, and deals. She didn't have time for softness, for stories, for small talk. She believed in results, not sentiment. But after that late-night encounter, something about the janitor lingered in her mind, the calm in his voice, the unshaken dignity behind his silence. Chopin, she'd repeated to herself later in her penthouse, pouring a glass of wine. He actually knew what it was. She had grown up around privilege, pianos, paintings, private tutors. But music, to her, was an accessory, not something sacred, not something lived. That man, David Morales, he had looked at the piano as if it were alive, as if it were the only thing that still understood him. And though she laughed it off deep down, she was curious. Could he really play? Over the next week, David began arriving early, long before the first employees arrived. He would polish the lobby floors, wipe down the glass doors, and then, when no one was around, approach the piano. At first, his fingers were clumsy. The years had stolen their precision. He fumbled through the arpeggios, stumbled over the left-hand runs. His wrists ached from disuse. But every morning he stayed a little longer. He would whisper to himself as he played, coaching his own movements. No, slower, feel it, don't force it. And then gradually, something began to return. The stiffness melted. The notes found their shape again. One morning, as he played, sunlight spilled across the lobby through the tall glass walls. It glinted off the polished marble, painting streaks of gold across his face. For a brief, breathtaking moment, he looked less like a janitor and more like the artist he once was. He didn't know someone was watching. Clara, a young receptionist, had arrived early that day, juggling her coffee and laptop. She froze at the entrance, eyes wide. The man behind the piano wasn't mopping floors or cleaning tables. He was playing with a kind of reverence that made her throat tighten. She didn't move, didn't dare. When the final note faded, she whispered, "That was beautiful." David turned, startled. He hadn't realized anyone was there. Clara smiled nervously. You should play for Ms. Lang. She'd have to listen." He shook his head. "It's not about her." But she could see it, the flicker of determination beneath his modest tone. Maybe it was about her. A little. A week later, Langford Tower buzzed with anticipation again. A high-profile charity gala was being hosted in the very same lobby. The chandelier-lit space transformed into an elegant ballroom for the night. Guests in shimmering gowns and tuxedos filled the room, their laughter echoing off the marble. Waiters moved like dancers, balancing trays of champagne. At the center of it all stood the piano, polished, perfect, waiting. Victoria Lang swept through the crowd in a silver gown, greeting investors and journalists with practiced smiles. Her laughter was effortless, her charm polished. But beneath it, she felt that same tug of curiosity, the memory of the janitor who knew Chopin. She noticed him working quietly near the buffet tables, gloves on, pushing his cleaning cart discreetly through the edges of the event. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment. He nodded respectfully. She looked away, though for reasons she couldn't name, she felt her chest tighten. Halfway through the evening, a problem arose. The small jazz trio scheduled to perform had been delayed, their flight grounded by weather. The event coordinator rushed to Victoria in a panic. "Ms. Lang, the piano's centerpiece. The donors expect live music. What should we do?" She frowned. "Call another musician. We've tried. No one's available on such short notice." Her jaw tightened. A silent ballroom would feel awkward, dull, empty. Music was atmosphere, and atmosphere was image. Then, behind her, a voice spoke quietly. "I can play." Everyone turned. David stood near the edge of the crowd, his cleaning gloves in hand. The coordinator blinked. "You?" Victoria's brows lifted in surprise, half amusement, half disbelief. "Mr. Morales," she said coolly, "you think you can handle a full ballroom?" He met her gaze evenly. "You said if I can play Chopin, you'd hire me on the spot." Her lips parted slightly. She hadn't expected him to remember. The guests nearby began to whisper. Victoria hesitated, then smirked. "Fine, impress me." He walked to the piano, the soft murmur of the crowd following him. Some people laughed quietly, others leaned in with curiosity. He removed his gloves, set them neatly on the bench, and sat down. The room went still. For a moment, he just stared at the keys, his reflection shimmering faintly on the polished surface. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and placed his hands on the keys. A lifetime of silence ended with one note. The opening chord of the nocturne in E-flat major flowed like silk through the air. It was delicate, trembling, almost hesitant, then richer, fuller, alive. The chatter died completely. Glasses stopped mid-air. The waiters froze where they stood. It was as if time itself held its breath. Every note carried something no training could teach: loss, longing, love, and redemption woven into melody. It wasn't flawless, it was human. Victoria felt something strange stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. The music was not just beautiful, it was truth. Her vision blurred slightly as the melody deepened, the part where Chopin let the right hand wander softly above the left, like two souls searching for each other in the dark. David's face was calm, almost serene. He wasn't playing for approval, not even for forgiveness. He was playing because he had to, because music was the only language left to him. When the final note faded, silence lingered. Pure, sacred silence. Then, like a wave, applause erupted. People stood. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Others just stared, awestruck. Victoria didn't move. Her throat tightened. Her chest felt heavy. All her walls, built from years of ambition, pride, and fear, cracked a little with every echo of that melody. She realized something terrible and beautiful at once. She had mocked a man whose soul was richer than her entire empire. David stood, bowed slightly, and began to walk away. "Wait!" Her voice stopped him. The crowd parted as she approached, eyes wide with disbelief. "You—" She struggled for words, the perfect CEO suddenly speechless. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" He looked at her calmly. "No one ever asked." The line hit her like thunder, simple, true, unforgiving. For the first time in her career, she felt ashamed of the life she had built, one where she saw titles before people, results before stories. Later that week, a quiet announcement went out to all staff. Effective immediately, Mr. David Morales is appointed as the official pianist in residence for Langford Tower. Employees murmured in shock. Some smiled, others clapped. But when David sat down to play again, none of that mattered. He wasn't proving himself anymore. He was free. And sometimes, late in the evening, Victoria would pass by and stop. She would stand quietly at the lobby doors, listening, not as a CEO, but as a woman rediscovering her heart. The music didn't need words anymore, it said everything. The applause had faded, but the echo of Chopin still lingered in the chandelier-lit air of Langford Tower's grand lobby. People were still whispering, unsure of what they had just witnessed. A janitor, a man they had seen pushing cleaning carts and wiping marble floors, had just played like a master. Not a performer, not an amateur, but an artist who had lived every note. When David walked away from the piano, it wasn't out of pride or defiance. It was because he had nothing left to say. Music had always been his truest language, and tonight he had spoken it for the first time in years. He didn't look back, but everyone else couldn't look away. Victoria Lang stood frozen among her guests, her fingers still curled around a champagne glass she hadn't lifted in minutes. Her pulse was loud in her ears, not from anger or embarrassment, but something far rarer. Awe and guilt. She had mocked this man. She had turned art into a dare. And he had turned her arrogance into something transcendent. As David disappeared into the side hallway, the lobby erupted into murmurs. Who was that? The janitor, I think. No, you're joking. That wasn't a janitor. I swear, he cleans this place every night. The confusion only deepened the reverence. Some guests were visibly emotional. One elderly woman dabbed her eyes and whispered to her husband, "That's the most human thing I've heard in years." Victoria heard them all. Every whisper felt like a mirror held up to her, reflecting the hollowness of her own success. She had built an empire, yes, but at what cost? How many Davids had she passed by, never asking, never listening? An hour later, after the guests had left and the last glasses had been cleared, Victoria found herself standing by the piano. The lobby was quiet again, empty except for the faint scent of polish and flowers. Her reflection stared back at her in the piano's black gloss. Beautiful, composed, successful, and utterly lost. Then she heard footsteps, soft, steady, familiar. David appeared at the far end of the hall, holding his cleaning gloves once more. He stopped when he saw her, unsure if he was in trouble. She spoke first, quietly. "You left before I could thank you." He smiled faintly, modestly. "There was nothing to thank me for." "Oh, there is," she said, walking closer. "You saved tonight's event. You silenced a room of critics. You even made me feel something I haven't felt in years." He looked at her with calm humility. "Music tends to do that, when people let it." Her throat tightened. "You said you used to play professionally." "I did," he said, "once upon a different life." She gestured to the bench. "Will you tell me about it?" He hesitated, then nodded, sitting down slowly. His hands rested on the keys again, though he didn't play this time. "I was 19, he began. "I had a scholarship in Warsaw. My mother was everything to me. She was the one who bought me my first piano, an old upright from a church sale. I promised her I'd make her proud." Victoria listened, her usual poise gone. There was no CEO here, only a woman listening to a story that made her chest ache. "One night," he continued, "we were driving home after my first recital. A drunk driver ran a red light." He swallowed hard. "She died instantly. My right hand was crushed. The doctors said I might never play again." Victoria's hand rose to her mouth. "Oh my God!" "I lost my scholarship, sold everything to pay her hospital bills. Then life happened, one odd job after another. Eventually, I stopped calling myself a musician. It felt dishonest." His voice was steady, but his eyes, dark, quiet eyes, shimmered with memory. "And then," he added softly, "I found this place. I just needed a job that would let me survive. The piano here reminded me of her, but I never touched it. Not until you—" He trailed off, and she understood. "Until I mocked you," she said quietly. He didn't deny it. Victoria sat beside him, the first time in years she'd shared a bench with anyone. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Do you know what the cruelest part is?" He looked at her curiously. "I don't even remember why I said it. That night, I was just tired, angry at some numbers on a screen, frustrated that people never meet my standards. I looked at you and thought, how could someone like you possibly know Chopin?" He gave a small, almost forgiving smile. "People make assumptions. It's human." "Not when they hurt," she said. For a long moment, the two sat in silence. Then, in a voice that trembled slightly, she said, "Would you play it again?" He blinked, surprised. "Now?" "Yes, for me, just once. I want to listen this time." The lobby was empty except for them. The chandeliers glowed softly, painting the marble with pools of gold and white. David closed his eyes, placed his hands on the keys, and began again. This time, the melody was slower, gentler, more intimate. It wasn't for an audience. It wasn't for redemption. It was for memory, for his mother, for himself, for forgiveness. Victoria didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes glistening. The music filled the emptiness inside her like sunlight through cracked glass. And when the final note faded, she found herself whispering, "That's what grief sounds like." David looked at her, surprised. She smiled faintly through tears. "I know that sound. I just never learned how to express it." When the silence settled again, Victoria stood, her heels clicking softly against the marble. "You said you lost your place in the world of music," she said. "How would you like it back?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned to him fully. "The hotel chain has performance spaces in 5 cities. We host corporate events, charity dinners, galas. I want you to be our pianist in residence, a real contract, a salary, recognition." He blinked, unsure how to respond. "Why me?" "Because," she said with quiet conviction, "you reminded me what art is supposed to feel like." His eyes softened, filled with disbelief. "And the janitor position?" She smiled gently. "Consider it retired." For the first time, he laughed, a quiet, genuine laugh that reached his eyes. By morning, the building buzzed with the news. "The janitor's a pianist. Ms. Lang promoted him. She cried during the performance, I heard." People didn't know what to make of it. Some scoffed, others smiled. But when David sat at the piano that afternoon and played softly for the staff as they passed by, no one laughed anymore. His music turned even the busiest morning into something holy. It slowed people down, made them listen. Even Victoria, now different in ways she couldn't yet describe, found herself scheduling 5-minute piano breaks between meetings. Her assistant caught her once, just standing there by the lobby, coffee in hand, eyes distant and peaceful. When asked why, she simply said, "Because I forgot how to listen to beauty. He reminded me." Weeks passed. The rigid, cold CEO who barked orders began to soften. She smiled more. She asked her staff's names. She started thanking people, not just for results, but for effort. The board noticed. Investors noticed. But the truth was, none of it was a strategy. It was change, born from humility and music. One night, after closing, she approached David again. "You know," she said, "your music has made me a better boss." He chuckled. "That's quite a claim." "It's true," she replied. "You made me realize people don't need more pressure. They need more purpose." He nodded thoughtfully. "And sometimes they just need someone to ask." Her heart twisted at his words, remembering that night, the way she had mocked him, and the way he had answered the world's cruelty with grace. Months later, at the annual Langford Gala, the spotlight shone not on Victoria, but on David. He played before hundreds, not as a janitor, not as a curiosity, but as a headliner. As he played, Victoria stood in the corner, watching proudly. And when the final note faded and the applause thundered once more, she whispered the words that had haunted her for months. Only now they carried gratitude instead of arrogance. "If you can play Chopin," she murmured with a soft smile, "I'll never underestimate anyone again." And for the first time, she meant every word. Later, in a quiet moment backstage, she approached him with a smile. "David, can I ask you something?" He turned, curious. What was it like, playing again after all these years? He thought for a moment. Then, in that calm voice she had come to recognize as both humble and profound, he said, "It felt like remembering who I was and forgiving who I became." She nodded slowly, emotion catching in her throat. "That's beautiful." He smiled faintly. "It's Chopin." The story of the janitor who played Chopin went viral online. Guests recorded the performance. Clips spread across social media. People wrote things like, "Never judge someone by their uniform. Talent never dies, it just waits to be seen." He didn't just play a song, he played his story. But David never sought fame. He simply played every night, quietly, faithfully, reminding everyone who passed through the lobby that beauty still lived in unexpected places. And Victoria, she changed her company's motto to 6 simple words that summed up everything she had learned from him. No one ever asked until now. By the next week, the world had already found the story. A hotel guest had secretly recorded the moment David played Chopin that night. The video, grainy but clear, showed his janitor uniform, his weathered hands trembling on the piano keys, and the stunned expression of the CEO who had once mocked him. Someone uploaded it with the caption, "When the janitor plays Chopin better than any concert pianist." Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Across platforms, across borders, millions watched, millions cried. They didn't see a janitor. They saw themselves, unseen, underestimated, waiting for someone to listen. Comments flooded in. "The pain in those notes, I felt it." "This man just told a lifetime story without saying a word." "I want to live in a world where CEOs apologize like that." "He's not a janitor. He's a genius." Victoria Lang woke up to over 900 missed calls, dozens of interview requests, and her PR manager pacing outside her office. "Victoria," he said breathlessly, "we're viral, like global viral. Every outlet wants to talk to you and him." She blinked, still processing. "Because of the video?" "Yes," he said, waving his tablet. "This clip hit 10 million views overnight. They're calling it the Chopin Redemption." Victoria stared at the screen. The comments, the hashtags, the reactions. It all blurred together into one overwhelming truth. People didn't hate her. They pitied her arrogance and admired the man she'd underestimated. David, meanwhile, had no idea. He didn't even have social media. That morning, as always, he showed up early, polished the lobby floor, and started tuning the hotel piano. When Victoria approached him, phone in hand, he smiled politely. "Good morning, Ms. Lang." "Good morning, Mr. David," she said with a teasing softness. He chuckled. "You sound like the news anchor who just called me that." "You've seen the video?" "Everyone keeps telling me about it," he said, still modest. "But I didn't think it was that big." She stepped closer, showing him the screen. "It's not big, David. It's monumental." The video was looping, him playing, the guests crying, her standing there frozen. The view count was climbing in real time. He watched for a few seconds, then looked away. "I didn't do it for this. I know," she said softly. "That's why it matters." By afternoon, a representative from a prestigious music conservatory called. They wanted David to perform at a charity gala, a full concert. Victoria couldn't help smiling when she told him. "They're offering to pay for your travel, accommodation, even a recording session afterward." "It's huge." David's expression was conflicted. "I don't know, Victoria. I haven't played in front of that many people in years." You played in front of hundreds the night you changed everything, she reminded him. You can do this. He hesitated, then finally asked, Would you come? Her eyes softened. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Before the gala, a famous journalist invited them both to a televised segment titled Grace in Humility. It wasn't staged. The raw honesty was what captivated viewers. The journalist leaned forward. Mr. David, how did it feel when the CEO challenged you that night? David smiled faintly. I didn't feel offended. I just saw a chance to let my mother's voice be heard again. Music was her dream before it was mine. The interviewer turned to Victoria. And, Ms. Lang, what went through your mind when he started to play? Victoria paused. Her voice trembled. Shame and awe. I realized I had judged someone without seeing them, and the music, it felt like being forgiven without asking. That line went viral on its own. Forgiven without asking. People called it the quote of the year. The charity gala was held in New York City, under glittering chandeliers and surrounded by the elite. But this time, it wasn't luxury that filled the air. It was reverence. David stood on stage in a simple black suit. No uniform, no gloves, no cart. Just him, the grand piano, and a silent audience waiting to feel something real. He glanced toward the front row, where Victoria sat, her eyes shining with pride. He began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The sound was liquid gold, rich, aching, full of memory, and yet it wasn't sad, it was thankful. Midway through the piece, he felt something shift inside him, a release. Years of silence, regret, and self-doubt began to dissolve. Every note was a tear he'd never cried, every chord a step back to himself. When the final note faded, there was no applause at first, only silence, and then thunder. The crowd rose to their feet. Some cried openly, others whispered prayers of thanks. It wasn't just music, it was resurrection. After the performance, Victoria found him backstage, sitting quietly, eyes closed. You did it, she whispered. He smiled, eyes still closed. No, we did it. You gave me back the courage to try. Her voice softened. No, David, you gave me back my heart. For a moment, they just stood there, two people from opposite worlds, connected by one truth: humility heals. Then he turned to her, a faint glimmer in his eyes. You know what my mother used to say? She shook her head. She said, some people play for applause, others play to remember who they are. Victoria smiled through tears. Then tonight, you remembered beautifully. The next morning, social media exploded again. This story is the definition of grace. He didn't just play Chopin, he played forgiveness. The CEO's face during the performance, priceless. People across the world began sharing their own stories of being underestimated: janitors, nurses, teachers, single parents. The Chopin effect trended globally. A wave of kindness followed, people tipping cleaners, thanking bus drivers, writing notes of appreciation to colleagues. The world had been moved, not by fame, but by humility. But fame is never clean. Some critics accused Victoria of exploiting David's story for publicity. She's using this for corporate gain, one headline read. Others questioned whether the promotion was genuine or performative. When a reporter cornered her with a sharp question, Ms. Lang, is this a redemption act or a PR move? She answered calmly, it's a human act, and I'll prove it. That week, she launched the Langford Foundation for Hidden Talent, a non-profit offering scholarships to underprivileged artists, janitors, street performers, and anyone with talent but no platform. And at the launch event, she announced David as the foundation's first director of music initiatives. The room erupted in applause. David stood at the podium, overwhelmed. He glanced at her, his voice breaking slightly. You turned a mistake into a movement. That's what grace looks like. Over the following months, the foundation hosted auditions for hidden talents: cleaners, cooks, security guards, delivery workers. Hundreds came. Dozens got opportunities. Victoria attended every single event. Sometimes she'd just sit in the back, listening, letting the music and laughter remind her of how far she'd come. David often joined her, no longer a janitor, but still the same humble soul who believed in quiet miracles. One evening, after an event, Victoria found herself alone in the hall again, the same place where it had all begun. The piano sat under soft lighting. She walked up to it, running her fingers over the polished wood. David appeared behind her. "Still can't resist it, huh?" he said with a smile. She laughed. "You'd think I'd have learned by now." He sat beside her. "Want me to teach you something?" She hesitated, then nodded. He placed her hand gently on the keys. "Middle C," he said softly. "That's where everything begins." She pressed it. The sound was simple, pure. She smiled. "It's beautiful." "It always was," he said. "You just had to touch it." Their eyes met, a silent, wordless understanding passing between them. Months later, a journalist revisited the story, asking them both one final question for a follow-up documentary. "What did Chopin teach you?" David answered first. "That beauty is born from pain, not privilege." Victoria followed, her voice calm and sure. "That humility is the highest form of art," and together they added, "Sometimes one note can change two lives." The screen faded to black with those words. Months had passed since the Foundation's launch. The world had moved on to new headlines, but for those who had lived the story, David and Victoria, it had left permanent ripples. The hotel lobby where it all began now carried a quiet reverence. Guests no longer walked past the piano without pausing. Children touched the keys with wonder. Housekeepers smiled when they passed David in the hall, not out of pity but pride. He was no longer the janitor. He was the man who reminded the world to listen. But time, like a melody, always changes key. David's health began to falter. The long nights of playing, the years of physical labor, and an old injury from his youth began catching up. At first it was small, a tremor in his hand, a stiffness in his wrist. Then one night, as he practiced, his fingers froze mid-note. Pain shot through his arm, and the melody broke into silence. He stared at his hand for a long time. A pianist's greatest fear, the music slipping away. The doctor's office was quiet, sterile. David sat with his hands folded, the faint smell of antiseptic making him uneasy. The doctor spoke softly. "It's early-onset arthritis, Mr. Hale. It's manageable, but you may need to stop performing." David chuckled bitterly. "That's like telling a bird to stop flying." The doctor gave a sympathetic smile. "You can still teach, still inspire, just not too much strain." He nodded, holding the news like a fragile instrument. When he told Victoria, she went silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "We'll figure it out." He smiled gently. "No, I will figure it out. You've already done enough." But she didn't agree. In her heart, she was already planning something, one last gift. It was exactly 1 year since that fateful night, the night Chopin returned to the world through a janitor's hands. Victoria planned an anniversary gala at the same hotel, the theme, "One Note Can Change a Life." Every detail was perfect, from the candlelight reflecting off the grand piano to the slideshow of hidden talents the Foundation had supported. The air shimmered with hope. But David wasn't there. He had quietly told her he wouldn't play that night. His hand was too weak. His confidence had waned. Victoria refused to accept it. She sent him a note that morning, handwritten, sealed in a white envelope. "You once told me no one ever asked. I'm asking now. Please play, not for them, but for us. VL." He held the letter for hours, reading it over and over. Finally, just before sunset, he put on his old black suit, polished his shoes, and walked to the hotel. The event was in full swing when he entered. The lights dimmed, the crowd hushed. Victoria noticed him immediately. Their eyes met across the hall. He nodded once, a silent yes. She blinked back tears as he walked toward the piano. Every phone went down, every whisper died. David sat at the bench, his hands trembling. He flexed his fingers once, twice, then rested them gently on the keys. He didn't play Chopin this time, he played something of his own. A melody that began soft and hesitant, like a memory learning to walk again. Each note shimmered like a heartbeat, fragile but full of love. The piece told a story of loss, of rediscovery, of forgiveness. And somewhere in the middle, a subtle echo of Chopin's nocturne wove through it, a nod to the beginning. Victoria's eyes filled. Guests held their breath. As he played, his hands shook, but the music didn't falter. It grew, stronger, braver, freer. By the end, he wasn't just playing, he was saying goodbye. The final note lingered like light on water. Then, silence. No applause at first, no sound, just quiet awe. Victoria rose slowly from her seat. She walked to the piano, tears glistening, and placed her hand over his trembling one. "You did it," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "No, we did it again." Then the applause came, thunderous, unstoppable, pure. The crowd rose to their feet, cheering for the janitor who had become a legend. But for David, the applause was distant. He looked up at the chandelier's reflection in the polished piano lid and smiled softly. He had come full circle. Later that night, long after the guests had gone, Victoria found him still sitting at the piano, lost in thought. "Don't tell me you're cleaning it again," she teased gently. He chuckled. "Force of habit." She sat beside him. "You know, when you played tonight it felt like you were saying something." He nodded. "I was. Goodbye. To the pain, not the music." "Good," she said quietly, "because the world still needs you." He smiled. "The world doesn't need me, Victoria. It just needs to remember to listen." She placed her hand over his. "Then promise me one thing." He turned to her. "When the day comes that you can't play anymore, let me." He smiled softly. "You, on piano?" She grinned. "Hey, I learned middle C." They laughed, their laughter echoing through the empty lobby, light, real, healing. A few weeks later, Victoria received a small package in the mail. No sender name, just her address in careful handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note. For when words fail. DH. The recording was simple, just David at the piano playing his final piece. The same melody from that last gala night, raw and intimate, recorded in the hotel after everyone had left. At the end of the track, his voice spoke softly. "To those who listen, thank you, and to the one who asked, keep asking." Victoria wept quietly as the music faded. That night, she uploaded the piece to the Foundation's website under the title, "When the Janitor Played for the World." Within hours, it went viral again, this time posthumously. The news broke that David Hale had passed away peacefully in his sleep that morning. Across social media, people shared his story again, not as a viral curiosity, but as a legacy. Clips of him playing filled timelines, quotes from the interviews resurfaced, no one ever asked. Some people play to remember who they are. Forgiven without asking. The foundation received thousands of donations in his name. Students began learning Chopin because of him. Hotel lobbies everywhere placed plaques by their pianos, dedicated to those who still believe in quiet miracles. Victoria attended his memorial, simple, elegant, filled with music. At the front stood the grand piano, covered in white lilies. She stepped forward, trembling slightly, and sat at the bench. The crowd fell silent. Her hands hovered over the keys. She pressed middle C, just as he'd taught her. Then another note, then another. A shaky, imperfect melody began to form, but it was enough. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered through the music, "You played, David," and the world finally listened. When she finished, she looked up and smiled through her tears. "I kept my promise," she murmured. Months later, a framed quote appeared in every Langford hotel worldwide. He was a janitor, then he was a pianist. But in truth, he was always both, because true greatness cleans the dust before it shines. The plaque sat beside a small brass sign that read, David Hale Memorial Piano. Please play something beautiful. Guests would sit, strangers from every corner of the world, and touch the keys. Sometimes they played Chopin, sometimes they played clumsy scales. But every time someone smiled, remembering him. And in those quiet moments, it felt as though David was still there, softly humming, gently dusting the piano, making sure the music never stopped.